their own occupation or related to other circumstances that they may be going through.
All right. And so that brings me to Esther. So from a human resources perspective then, what is the importance of prioritizing mental wellness in our workplaces, in our organizations, for both managers and employees as well?
Thank you. I like what my sister Catherine has said, because when employees, you see, we talk about an organizational culture. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about culture, I'm very passionate about organizational culture, because a culture sets the tone of an organization. Right. Now, the elements around that, the policies, processes, the organizational structure, because we looked at the story of Wanjiku, and she said, you know, her coming in was very good until after a month. That's when the culture set in, mm-hmm. you know, when people have stories about a certain place. You see, we ignore the stories that we hear. And she said that right. someone actually warned her. I've been in that space where one time someone asked, I was actually being hunted by a certain organization. And I went to a friend of mine who was working in that organization and asked him, so what do you think about this place? And he told me, join them at your own risk. Mm. I didn't. It's unfortunate that she did. Maybe she, of course, we need the jobs. But to prioritize this, you know, you need to understand an organizational culture. We need to set the tone. We need to have policies and processes. And we have them. Most organizations actually have them. Mm. They even get consultants to design the policies and processes. But then are they in place, you know? Mm. Is the employee experience as important as the customer experience? Mm. Within the organization? Because you see, there is what we call employer branding. What do people say about you? How are you treating your people, you know? Because you can have the best brand. You can just have the best advertisement. But what is the real talk within the organization?
So it comes back down to that culture that you're speaking, the organizational culture.
The right. pockets of power where are decisions made. And Catherine has said that empowering employees to be able to make decisions, micromanagement, and that is what exactly employees say when they say, I am in a toxic relationship. And we think they're being rude. They're not. They're simply saying, I'm not getting my space to make decisions. Mm-hmm. You know, I am not giving what I should. And when I tell employers, when you hire somebody, you hire them because they're competent. Mm-hmm. So when does micromanagement come in? Sometimes as you ask for managers and supervisors, it could be insecurities around the supervisors. Unfortunately, it could be that they're also not trained to lead people. Because sometimes we also just appoint people and we don't equip them for that. It could be a role conflict within the organization. So we need to look into our culture. There's Peter Drucker, and it's very common. People say, you know, Peter Drucker said, culture is strategy for breakfast. Now, you can have the best strategy as an organization, but if your culture is what the employee call toxic, it won't see the light of day. So we need to fix the organizational culture. Right. We need to fix that employee experience in the workplace. And
there's usually this adage that says, or you've had it perhaps, you know, that people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses, right?
Yes.
So, Mercy, when you're looking at the legal obligations that employers have then regarding mental health support in the workplace, what does that mean?
Well, I think when it comes to employment matters, the first stop for me is always like at the Constitution. First and foremost, I'm a human rights lawyer, so I always have to base, why do we even have employment laws, for example? And in the Constitution, there's this idea of dignity, right? And the first thing it tells you in the Bill of Rights is that these rights are not given to us. They're not, it's not the employer giving you your right to payment or your right to be treated fairly. We come with dignity inherent to us, right? And the whole idea of human rights really is to preserve this dignity, to uphold your dignity. So you find the right to fair labor relations, for example, in the Constitution. And you pay attention to the actual words that are being used there. Fair labor relations. And the first thing it tells you is to reasonable working conditions, right? So you imagine that maybe it's a very complex thing that, the Constitution is trying to, micromanage relationship, but it's not. At the end of the day, when a judge looks at your situation, if this ends up being a case, really, it's about, were you treated fairly? In any situation, it's always going to come down to that. So I find where the mix with mental health comes in, is when employers don't treat people fairly. It's like, because of the culture she's talking about, we've converted workplaces into toxic hells. So it's a political contest at any given point. You're not sure how you're going to get promoted, for example. You always have to think, what game do I need to play? Who do I need to have an affair with? Who do I need to sweet talk? If this one's having an affair with this one, who should I one-up them? And that's how I get promoted. Nobody is acting fairly. So there's this mess where you feel like you're running a race that you're never going to win, and that leads to mental health deterioration. So if you don't treat employees fairly, of course, it's going to lead to a mental health deterioration, and that's going to become more complex. Like she's saying, it starts at the top. At the top, it's already toxic, where there's expectations from you as a supervisor, but you don't know what these expectations are. You're always being told you're performing poorly, but what is poorly? Or we'll increase your salary at the end of 3 months, and that just never happens. That's not a reasonable working environment, and that's really what the law is telling you, that you have to subject your workers to a predictable working environment. If you tell them that if you do this, then it's going to lead to disciplinary action, it needs to apply across the board, not where you pick and choose. And then there's these situations where you're not treated fairly, it leads to mental health deterioration, and then what? So what are you supposed to do about that? Can you, for example, take your employer to court because they stressed you so bad that you suffered depression, or it's so toxic? Sometimes it's very hard to put these things into legal language, that they're just toxic, or they're just so hateful that they've, killed my life, or I just feel like dying because of what has happened to me at work. And at the end of the day, it's always going to come back to, did they treat you fairly? And you'll find the answer is always no. You were either being subjected to some unknown rules, or some competition that doesn't really have a word, or moving targets, for example, or you're not being paid your salary on time, and these things in themselves are legal violations. Essentially, what I'm saying is, if employers follow the law, and if they treat the employees fairly, then you do end up having a healthy working environment. It's not about your personality. You can be the worst person, you can be a person people cannot stand, but as long as you treat your workers fairly, then we don't have to get into your personality. You shouldn't be a good person to be a good boss.
Right.
You should just be a person that follows the law.
And then it also goes back exactly to what Esther had said in terms of training and upskilling.